My name is Nina. I'm 33 years old, and until about 2 years ago, most of my husband's family assumed I answered phones for a living. That wasn't entirely wrong, but the paperwork I processed had a way of determining whether entire businesses survived or disappeared. I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, the younger of 2 daughters in a family where money was always something we were careful with, never careless. My mother worked as a hospital billing coordinator. My father drove a delivery route for a food distribution company. They weren't struggling, but they weren't comfortable either. They existed in that particular in-between where every month required attention. I watched my mother balance a household budget the way other people play chess. Every move was deliberate. Nothing was wasted. After high school, I enrolled at Tarrant County College and worked evenings as a front desk clerk at a Hampton Inn near the airport. The job paid barely enough to matter, but it taught me things a classroom couldn't. Guests arrived angry, exhausted, confused, or all three at once. My job was to fix problems that weren't my fault without making the guest feel like they needed to apologize for having them. I got good at staying calm when things were unfair. I didn't know then how useful that skill would turn out to be. I transferred to UT Arlington after 2 years and finished my business degree, while still working weekends at the hotel. I met my husband Jordan in an accounting elective during my junior year. His family was nothing like mine. His father, a man named Gordon, had built a catering and event venue business from a single rented kitchen into a 4-location operation that handled weddings, corporate retreats, and charity galas across the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. The flagship venue sat in uptown Dallas. It had exposed brick walls, a chef's kitchen visible through floor-to-ceiling glass, and a waiting list for Saturday bookings that stretched 6 months out. Jordan was warm and easy to be around. His father was something else entirely. The first time I met Gordon was at a 4th of July cookout at his house in South Lake. The house had a pool, a putting green, and a smoker large enough to feed 40 people, which is exactly what he was doing. He greeted me the way a person greets a minor inconvenience they've decided to tolerate. He asked what I did. I told him I'd recently started as a claims examiner at Meridian Commercial Insurance. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they aren't actually listening, and then turned to the man standing beside him and started talking about a contract he was finalizing with a hotel group. That was the first time. It was not the last. Jordan and I married 3 years later in a small ceremony in McKinney. It was exactly what we wanted. Close friends, immediate family, dinner at a restaurant we actually liked. Gordon spent part of the reception talking to his accountant about a catering proposal. My mother-in-law, Loretta, who was kind in the way that people are kind when they want to avoid conflict, told me multiple times that the centerpieces were lovely. After we got back from our honeymoon, we had dinner at Gordon's house maybe once a month. Gordon talked about his venues, his contracts, his industry contacts. Jordan's younger brother Trent, who managed one of the satellite locations, nodded and contributed when he could. I ate and asked questions when they seemed useful. Gordon answered them the way a person answers a child who wants to know why the sky is blue, not unkindly, but without any genuine belief that the question came from someone who needed a real answer. At his company's anniversary gala, an annual event Gordon threw at the uptown venue for clients and business partners, he introduced me to a table of investors with the following sentence: "This is Nina, Jordan's wife. She works in insurance. You know these people. They take your premium every month and spend the next 12 years finding reasons your claim doesn't qualify." The table laughed. Some because they thought it was funny, others because Gordon was laughing, and successful people rarely laugh alone. I smiled. I said, "It's actually more complicated than that." Then I picked up my water glass and let the conversation move on. In the car on the way home, Jordan reached across the console and held my hand without saying anything. He knew. He always knew. What nobody at that table knew, what nobody in that family knew, was that 3 years earlier I had passed the CPCU examinations and become a chartered property casualty underwriter. It was a designation that took most people 4 to 6 years to complete. I had done it while working full-time, studying on weekends and nights after Jordan had gone to sleep, sitting at our kitchen table with textbooks spread under a lamp while the rest of the neighborhood was quiet. I wasn't a phone operator. I was a senior loss analyst who evaluated commercial claims worth millions of dollars. I had been promoted twice in 4 years. My caseload included hospitality businesses, manufacturing facilities, and commercial real estate across the Southwest. I had stopped explaining myself somewhere around year 2 of the marriage. Some people decide who you are based on the first thing they learn about you, and then they keep that version regardless of any evidence to the contrary. Explaining yourself to those people doesn't change their minds. It just gets exhausting. So I kept going to the dinners. I smiled at the galas. I went home and went back to work on Monday. 14 months after that anniversary gala, on a Wednesday in late October, a gas line fault behind the kitchen range wall at Gordon's flagship venue in Uptown Dallas ignited just before the morning prep crew arrived. The fire spread through the kitchen and into the main dining room before the suppression system fully engaged. Nobody was injured. The structure wasn't a total loss, but the kitchen was destroyed. The main hall had extensive smoke and water damage, and the venue would not be operational for months. Gordon submitted a commercial property claim to Meridian Commercial Insurance Group for $7,200,000. The file landed on my desk the following Thursday. I sat in my chair and stared at the business name on the cover sheet for a full minute before I moved. Harvest Table Event Group, 4 locations, primary insured, Gordon, the flagship venue on McKinney Avenue. My first instinct wasn't satisfaction. It was something closer to nausea, because I already understood exactly how complicated the next several weeks were going to be. I called my direct supervisor, a woman named Winona, who had been in commercial claims for 18 years and had seen every version of this situation, and told her about the relationship before she had a chance to formally assign the file. I wasn't trying to hand it off. I was making sure she knew, on the record, before I touched a single document. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Do you feel you can evaluate this without it affecting your analysis?" I told her I could. She said, "Then the file is yours, but I'll be reviewing every step." That was the right call, and I respected her for making it. The next morning I opened the claim and began the only way I knew how, with the numbers. Gordon's team had submitted a detailed breakdown, structural and equipment losses, inventory damage, and a business interruption calculation projecting lost revenue over an 18-month rebuild period. The equipment list was extensive. Commercial-grade ranges, walk-in refrigeration systems, a custom wood-burning oven imported from Italy. Each item was listed at current replacement value. The structural estimate looked reasonable at first pass. The business interruption figure is where things started to complicate. Business interruption insurance is calculated from actual revenue history. You take what the business earned during comparable periods in prior years, project the expected loss during the recovery window, and that becomes the basis for the claim. The number Harvest Table submitted implied the venue had been booking near capacity on weekends and commanding premium rates on corporate events consistently for 3 years. I requested the booking records going back 36 months. The records told a different story. The Uptown venue had strong numbers in 2021 and a solid first half of 2022, but corporate bookings had dropped noticeably in the second half of 2022 and throughout most of 2023. Several Saturday slots in the past 12 months had been either canceled or rebooked at reduced rates. The revenue projection in the claim was built on the business's best quarters ever, not on what the venue had actually been earning recently. That wasn't fraud. It was a calculation method that required challenge. I also found 3 items on the equipment list that gave me pause. The Italian wood-burning oven was listed as purchased 18 months prior and valued at full replacement cost. But in a policy renewal document from 3 years earlier, that same oven appeared on a supplemental property schedule with a noted pre-existing mechanical issue that had been disclosed to the underwriter at renewal. The issue had apparently been repaired, but the repair records weren't included in the current claims submission. I requested them. That same week, the phone calls started. My mother-in-law called on a Tuesday evening and asked how I was doing in the careful tone people use when they're working towards something. We talked for a few minutes about nothing. Then she said, "Gordon is so stressed about the venue situation. It's been difficult for the whole family." I said I was sure it had been. She said, "I know you work with these kinds of claims at your job. Is there anything that can help move things along?" I explained that I couldn't discuss an active file. She said she understood. She called again 4 days later. Trent texted Jordan, not me, asking whether I could look into the timeline. Jordan told him the same thing I'd told Loretta. Trent followed up with a longer message that Jordan showed me without comment. It included the phrase, "Families should look out for family," which is the kind of sentence that sounds generous until you realize it only ever gets said when one side of the family wants something from the other. The hardest conversation came from Jordan himself, not because he pushed, he didn't. But I could see him trying very hard not to ask, and the effort it took him was written on his face every evening when he got home. One night, he sat down at the kitchen table while I was reviewing documents and just said, "How are you doing with all of it?" Not the claim. All of it. I told him I was doing the job. He nodded. He got up and made us both tea and didn't say another word about it. I visited the Uptown venue twice during the investigation. The first time was with a licensed property adjuster and a structural engineer assessing the damage. The second time I went alone to walk the inventory against the equipment list. Several longtime employees were on site during the rebuilding prep work. Two of them recognized me immediately. A kitchen manager who had worked for Gordon for 11 years, and a setup coordinator who used to joke with me at family events. They were polite and cooperative and clearly had no idea I was there as a claims examiner rather than a family member. Listening to them talk about the morning the fire started, about what the venue normally looked like before service, about how much the flagship location meant to the other three. I had the feeling that comes with every complicated file. The problem wasn't the owner. The problem was everyone downstream of the owner who hadn't made any of the decisions that created the gap between what was claimed and what the documents could support. I wrote my analysis over 12 days. I documented every discrepancy. I proposed a recalculation of the business interruption figure using actual trailing revenue. I flagged the equipment questions and noted that the repair records, when they arrived, did not fully resolve the pre-existing condition disclosure. I listed the legitimate losses in full: structural damage, HVAC systems, undisputed kitchen equipment, verified inventory. I ran both totals side by side. The legitimate loss figure came to $4,840,000. The claim as submitted was $7.2 million. The difference wasn't fabrication. It was the gap between what a business owner believes he's owed and what the policy documents can actually support. I submitted the analysis to Winona on a Friday afternoon and stayed late to walk her through it in person. She read it carefully, asked 3 clarifying questions, and said, "Good work. I'll schedule the meeting." The coverage determination meeting was held 10 days later at Meridian's main office. Gordon arrived with his business attorney and his CFO. He was composed and confident in the way that people are confident when they've spent decades being the most important person in every room they entered. He was halfway through a sentence about the venue's role in the local events economy when he noticed me. Not the way you notice someone you recognize across a lobby. The way you notice something that doesn't match the picture you'd already assembled in your head. He stopped speaking for just a second. Brief enough that probably only I caught it, and then finished his sentence. 20 minutes into the meeting, Winona asked me to present the loss analysis. I presented it the way I'd been trained to present every file. Clearly, methodically, without editorializing. I explained the business interruption recalculation and showed the booking data that supported it. I walked through the equipment items and the corresponding policy documents. I laid out the legitimate losses and the areas where the claim methodology couldn't be sustained by the documentation provided. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Gordon's attorney asked 2 procedural questions. I answered both. Gordon looked at me the way he had never looked at me before. Not as Jordan's wife, not as the woman who works in insurance. As someone who had just spent weeks taking apart a $7 million claim, document by document, and explained, in front of his attorney and his CFO, exactly what could and could not be supported. He didn't say anything to me that day. His attorney said they would review the analysis and respond within the statutory period. They left. The room cleared. In the parking garage afterward, I sat in my car for a few minutes before starting the engine. Not because I was upset. I just needed a moment to let the professional and the personal exist in the same body without either one falling apart. Then I drove home. The formal determination went out 10 days later. Meridian approved $4,840,000. The business interruption calculation was adjusted to reflect actual trailing revenue. 2 of the 3 disputed equipment items were approved at depreciated value. The wood-burning oven was approved at a reduced amount contingent on final documentation. Gordon's attorney filed a request for a coverage review, which is standard and which I fully expected. An independent panel confirmed the determination with minor adjustments. The final approved amount was $4,910,000. The first conversation Gordon and I had after all of it happened at Thanksgiving. Jordan and I arrived at his parents' house a little after noon. Loretta hugged me longer than usual. Trent shook my hand and looked at the floor. Gordon was standing by the kitchen island, and when I walked in, he looked at me differently than he had in 7 years of dinners. Not warm exactly, not apologetic, something closer to recalibration. We ate with the television on in the background, and the conversation carefully routed around the one subject everyone was thinking about. After the meal, Gordon asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes. He poured 2 cups and carried them to the living room and set one on the table in front of me without saying anything. Then he sat down. He looked at his cup for a moment. Then he said, "The business is going to make it. The rebuild is on schedule. We've had to adjust the model. Smaller footprint, fewer last-minute bookings, tighter contracts." He paused. "The numbers your team presented were right. I didn't want them to be, but they were right." I waited. He said, "I spent a lot of years being the person who understood how things worked. It's a strange thing to realize you had a blind spot the whole time." He didn't say my name. He didn't connect that sentence to the gala or the dinners or the 7 years of introductions that treated me like a pleasant irrelevance, but he said it to me. Not to Jordan, not to his attorney, to me. I said, "Good businesses survive because someone tells them the truth even when the truth is inconvenient." He nodded once, slowly. Then we finished our coffee, and the rest of the afternoon moved on the way afternoons do. The venue reopened 8 months after the fire. Smaller than before, which turned out to be a deliberate choice. Gordon had restructured the entire operation during the rebuild, consolidating 2 of the satellite locations, refocusing on fewer, higher-value contracts. His CFO told Jordan privately that the restructuring improved margins in ways that growth alone had never managed. Gordon never mentioned the claim to me again. But things changed in the quieter ways that sometimes matter more than the obvious ones. At a birthday dinner the following spring, I heard him introduce me to someone I hadn't met before. He said, "This is Nina, Jordan's wife. She's a senior loss analyst at Meridian, commercial property, very good at what she does." He said without ceremony and moved on to the next sentence before I had time to react. I excused myself a few minutes later and stood in the hallway, with my hand on the wall. 7 years. 7 years of being Jordan's wife who works in insurance, who processes paperwork, who doesn't quite belong in the room where the real business happens. And here quietly, with no audience and no dramatic gesture, he had finally said the words out loud. I went back to the table. Dinner continued. Nobody else noticed anything had changed. Several months after that, Gordon was invited to speak on a small panel at a Dallas Business Recovery Forum. The kind of event the Chamber of Commerce hosts for small and mid-size owners who've navigated major disruptions. Meridian sponsored the event and sent 2 of us from the commercial division. I sat in the 3rd row. During the Q&A, someone asked Gordon what the hardest part of the recovery had been. He said it wasn't the fire, it wasn't the money, it wasn't even the months of construction delays. He said, "The hardest part was accepting that the picture I had of my own business was wrong. I had been measuring success by how much we were growing. I wasn't measuring whether that growth was sustainable. And the person who showed me the difference wasn't a consultant or a banker." He paused. It was someone I had underestimated for a long time. He didn't look in my direction. He didn't need to. The woman from our department sitting beside me glanced over with a curious expression. I just watched the moderator move on to the next question. People sometimes ask whether things became easy after that. They didn't. Gordon is still the person he has always been, certain, accustomed to being heard, not naturally inclined toward conversations that center anyone else's experience for very long. We are not close in the way I am close with my own family. We probably never will be. But something real shifted. When I'm at those dinners now, he asks questions and waits for the answer. When I explain something about a case or a policy structure, he doesn't nod and move on. He listens, the way someone listens, when they've discovered, somewhat against their will, that the person across from them knows something they don't. Jordan said something to me a few weeks after the forum. We were driving home from dinner at his parents' house, and he said, "My father talks about you differently now. Have you noticed?" I told him I had. He said, "It took him long enough." I told him that some people need to be in a room where they have no choice but to see you clearly before they actually look. 2 years after the claim closed, I was promoted to Regional Claims Director for Meridian's Southwest Division. It meant managing a team of 12 analysts across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. It also meant that I now spent a significant portion of my time helping younger examiners navigate exactly the kinds of files where the facts and the emotions refused to stay in separate corners. Whenever someone on my team came to me, struggling with a case that felt too personal to handle cleanly, I recognized the feeling immediately. I'd lived it. One Friday on my way home, I passed the Hampton Inn near DFW, where I used to work the front desk during college. The building looked the same. The parking lot had been repaved. The sign above the entrance was a slightly newer version of the old one. I pulled into the lot and sat for a minute with the engine running. That job had taught me patience, the particular kind that doesn't require anyone else to acknowledge it's happening. It taught me to fix problems that weren't my fault without making the other person feel like they owed me an apology. It taught me that the people who are least likely to treat you as someone worth listening to are sometimes the people whose situations most depend on someone exactly like you. $4,910,000 settled a financial claim. But the thing that made it possible to sit in that meeting room, present those numbers without flinching, and wait calmly while a room full of people decided what my work was worth, that came from standing behind a front desk at 20 years old, learning how to stay calm when things were unfair. My father-in-law once introduced me as the kind of person who takes your money and finds reasons not to pay. What I actually am is the person who tells you the truth, even when the truth costs more than a lie would have. And as it turned out, that was exactly what his business needed to survive. Before you go, think about the person in your life who treated your work like it didn't matter, until the moment it was the only thing standing between them and everything falling apart. If this story brought someone to mind, share it with someone who will understand. And don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.